Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Film Score Podcast. Today, my guest is the burgeoning composer Jessica Rose Weiss. Now, her latest and probably her breakout film score is Amazon Prime's Cinderella, which is just released on September 3rd. She co-composed the score with legendary composer Michael Dana, who's also served as her mentor for the last several years. Somehow, Jess has managed to also release two other scores on the same day, one for the film called Afterlife of the Party, and the other for the film called Doggone Trouble. And it's kind of exciting seeing someone on the precipice of breaking out. Jess and I get into Cinderella, her mentorship with Michael Dana, as well as her time working at Hans Zimmer's Remote Control Productions, probably one of the most important institutions in modern film scoring. You can find Jess on social media, primarily on Instagram, as well as on her website. And of course, you can find the same for me. Now, in this interview, we just jump right into it. There is no introduction, nothing. Just bam, so don't feel like you've missed anything. I will note that, and as sometimes happens with these remote interviews, Jess's audio occasionally clips a little bit. And I've tried to resolve that as much as I can, but you can only do so much. So a little of it will be present here and again. And as I said, this is just part of the territory of doing virtual interviews. Now, sit back, and I hope you enjoy.
We're such a interesting, unique art form, and we're always looking for ways to get our music out there and our voices out there. You know, it's like we're not actors, we're not rock and roll bands, so we're a little bit unusual, and it's always helpful to have people who care and take interest. And
that's what's so funny is the amount of anecdotes I've heard of people who are interested in film music talking with like their friends or family, and the friends and family having that eureka moment of, oh yeah, you know what, there is music in film. Like,
yes,
like some people, it's just such an afterthought. And I've heard various theories on film music. You know, there are some people who say, oh, that's what you want film music to do, so it's not even noticed, so it like blends into everything, and others who obviously have the exact opposite viewpoint.
Yeah. I mean, I think for the masses that don't really potentially take notice of film music, it's also probably, especially now more than ever, we're kind of getting back to it. I hope we are. But the idea of like thematic writing in film music really transition into something else, to your point, kind of just like a supportive layer of a voice rather than John Williams level thematic material, like that's when you can't help but no, I mean, it's impossible not to notice it when you're watching E.T. or Superman or what have you. But I think, yeah, we're hopefully like getting back to that point in time now where strong themes and rich orchestral scores or electronic scores are hopefully kind of taking the forefront in a way. They're becoming more likable again, I suppose. So,
and I think there's always a place for that, at least for the people who like really love film music, because all those people grew up on like Williams and then Howard Shore's Lord of the Rings, which just kind of, I don't want to say revolutionized, but it was like such a testament to how much thematic music can go. There are people who are really working on that, but I think part of it is tones work so well, but also a lot of times composers, you don't have a long period to work on scores sometimes, or you have a smaller budget. It's like, oh, you
always
can't write like 6 rich developed themes in 5 weeks on a tight budget.
Yeah, exactly right. So we're working on all those setbacks, so to speak, but we figured them out.
So that kind of segues a little bit into your upcoming work. It's just Cinderella. It comes out, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's September 3rd.
Yep.
Which the actual original score occupies a bit of a weird spot because it's a musical, and so the score is largely interspersed in between in those non-musical moments. So it's somewhere where you don't have the room in the film to build out huge thematic elements, but at the same time you're still able to weave a little bit in there, at least as much as you can.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a big part of the job on this film was finding interesting ways to interpolate some of the songs into the score, as well as writing strong themes for the characters and, the relationships between characters. And so this score is traditional in the sense that it's very orchestral and magic fairy tale like, but we also try to kind of root it in Ella's character in the sense that she's rough around the edges and she's a feminist and she's tough. And so, we also use a lot of folk instrumentation as well. So a lot of guitars and dulcimers and things like that. So yeah, we had a really great time exploring that. And to your point, even though it's a musical, it's a jukebox musical, it's so song driven, we really wanted to make sure that the score also had a voice. And so every time we have those moments in the film, those themes are rich and they're carried throughout the film and support the story and stuff.
And so, how did you? Because you're talking about the sound palette that you and Michael Dano used for the score,
Yeah.
and obviously it being a fairy tale and a retelling of Cinderella, and it has all these magical moments, it makes sense to use that a bit. But at the same time, the songs are very modern, and so the whole film has this kind of anachronistic feeling as well. So, how did you figure out like how much of the pop melody and instrumentation to lean into versus keeping it more
Mhm.
traditional? I mean, that's got to be a tough balance to strike.
Yeah, I mean, it was at first, and again, that's the beginning stages of scoring a film are always exciting and nerve-wracking because you're trying to figure out what that balance will be and how to first and foremost support the story, support the narrative, and make sure that what you're doing is honest. In those moments where Fab G, who's the fairy godmother, Billy Porter, who's incredible, when he arrives on the scene, I mean, it just felt there was no other way to score that moment other than making it huge and orchestral and magical because I can't, no spoilers, but he arrives in that fashion. So it felt very fitting to score it that way. But I think again, Cinderella, she's a very grounded, intelligent, outspoken character. And I think it came to both Michael and I quite quickly that she needed to feel rooted, that her sound, her identity, her musical identity wouldn't be a piano and strings. All those things are incorporated, but really like having a melody on the acoustic guitar just felt like it was supportive of her character. But it's always you're always exploring those ideas and quickly figuring out what works and what doesn't. So yeah, we go through that a lot.
And you said you landed on it quite quickly, but were there any avenues that you explored that you reached the dead end and were like, no, this won't work at all?
Yeah, I think initially we both felt okay. The juxtaposition of the songs being very contemporary and pop and having a very traditional orchestral score will actually work really nicely. And we did do that. But I think, when we were first exploring her theme, we did try piano and strings and maybe her instrument was a flute. And then we went, oh, okay, this is a little on the nose. This is a little typical. Like, let's rethink this one, So yeah, that was definitely a good learning experience of what not to do. you know, it's a fine line between being authentic and knowing what the film is asking for versus being a bit obvious. So that's always a big part of the exploration, when you're trying to figure out.
I always imagine that that's the tough decision because sometimes the obvious thing is obvious because it works.
Exactly right.
And yeah, at some point you've got to make the choice of do we want to go for the obvious that's going to work or spend time doing something a little different that when we get down to it might not work so well.
Exactly. But it's always worth exploring all options because oftentimes you land on something that is unexpected and makes your score unique and creates a different color, and it becomes potentially one of the most important parts of your score. What you choose, what instruments you choose to use, the instrumentation, the arrangements, like that's such a huge part of, that's everything really. So it's a difficult but exciting process nonetheless. So
So you and Michael co-composed it. working together to figure out the palette and the instrumentation and everything else. But what was the actual working relationship? How did the two of you work together to co-compose the score?
Yeah. So, we had our traditional spotting session with the whole crew and Kay Cannon, who's the director, who's fabulous and was such a joy to work with. She's just a hoot. She's incredible. And so after we had the spotting session, Michael and I got to work and we discussed themes and, who needs what. And we kind of assigned themes to each other, and it's a bit of a tennis match. You keep passing it back and forth, and yeah, it was really collaborative. He's so supportive, and he was definitely open to a lot of different ideas, and he's such a legend. He's been doing this for 100 years, so I really trust his opinion, and so it was really an exciting process just because, I'd throw a theme out, I'd play a theme on the guitar and arrange some of it and orchestrate a bit, and I'd send it over and he'd say, "This is cool. I'm not sure about this. Let me try this." And he'd add something. So it was kind of like being in a band, in a way, which was really fun.
Yeah, that is cool. And that's got to be a little familiar or comforting for you having that band mentality, because I know that's some of your background in addition to film scoring.
Absolutely.
Did you run into any times where you two butted heads over anything, or was it all really worked together really well?
It was very natural, and I've worked with Michael for several years now, in varying capacities. And so, I did a lot of additional music for him for quite a while, and then we co-scored a VR series that's going to come out, which is really exciting. And, I've worked with him on so many different levels that I also know his process and I trust his process. It's very clear that it works, especially given what he's built in his career. So, no, I think the differences, if any, would really show up when notes are given. It's always that kind of push and pull of, okay, so they want more of this and less of this. And so I might say, well, should we fight for this? This is really working. And he may say like, maybe just pull it back, scale it back a bit so that they can figure out if they miss it or not. So just little moments like that, dialogues like that, where that was like the worst of it. So, it was pretty lovely experience overall.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And yeah, I know some of the things that you'd worked with him on providing some additional music were, I think it was A Dog's Way Home and The Addams Family.
Yeah.
Having that long-standing relationship, that's got to be such a blessing in film music. How did you get into that in the first place? How did you first meet up with Michael and start that? I don't know if you'd call it like a mentorship or just a composing relationship or what.
No, it's a full-on mentorship. I came to LA after working in the film world in varying capacities. As a music editor, as an assistant to a film composer in New York. And when I came to LA, I worked with Hans Zimmer at Remote Control for a while and with Lauren Belf and all these other wonderful composers as a music editor. So I was still writing and trying to figure out where I was going to land. But at that time, that's primarily what I was doing. I was kind of scoring and writing music on the side, but my day gig was music editing. So I met Michael because I was called in to help assist on a film that he had scored as a music editor, as an assistant music editor to his main guy. So I met him on this film called Transcendence, which was directed by Wally Pfister, which was 2012, maybe 2011, 2012. And then I just pursued the relationship, and I love Michael's work. I always have. And I wanted to work with him in any capacity, but I made it very clear off the bat that I really was going in the direction of composition, and that's what I cared about doing. And so I worked with Michael as a music editor, and then as an additional composer, and then as a co-composer. So I took every step so that I could prove myself and learn from him. But he's the true mentor in my life. So I'm very, very lucky.
That's great.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's possible off the top of your head to boil it down into one or two things, but what would you say maybe some of the most useful advice or things that you've learned from this several year long relationship has been?
It always rings true for me. Just be yourself. That great Oscar Wilde quote, be yourself, everyone else is taken. I may have botched that up, but it's something along, that's the general idea anyway. And I think that's always been very important. And Michael has always advised anyone that he's mentored, to be true to their voice and their artistry, and to not try to copy him. I really value that in our working relationship. It's just about, what can you learn from me? How can I help you excel and move forward and basically master your own craft? Don't spend time worrying about what I do and trying to copy that. That's not going to lead you to where you want to go, essentially. Your success is going to come from your authentic voice, not copycatting mine. So that's always been a really wonderful piece of advice, and something that I say to composers who are interested in my trajectory and how I got to where I am. I've always said, like, just stick to your guns. Your weaknesses are actually valuable, and use them.
I think that's such an important piece of advice, especially for a lot of younger composers growing up, looking up to people like John Williams and Hans Zimmer, who obviously both have very distinct styles. I think it's not uncommon to see that and to, not totally emulate it, because in one sense,
how can you?
You just can't. Right, exactly.
Right.
But to try to. That can have its use when you're getting your feet wet. But yeah, actually figuring out, okay, what is my voice? What's my style? What's my sound?
Yeah.
And you're still, relatively speaking, fairly early on in your film composing career. So would you say that you've found it yet, or are you still exploring and figuring out what your sound is?
I mean, I'm definitely exploring it. I think I'll always be exploring it, to be honest. Another great mentor of mine said, it's not your responsibility as the artist, as the creative, to try to hear it. It's inevitable that if you continue to pursue your authentic voice and your authentic self, it will reveal itself in due time. So don't waste your time trying to figure out what it is. And I think that's really important. And I've also been told, and I've taken it to heart, that whether you like it or not, the influences that arise in childhood tend to sculpt, it shapes your voice. Yeah, I mean, I know that I've seen West Side Story more times than any other film in history. And, I have a theater background, and, it's that and Tchaikovsky, because I was a ballerina for 15 years. And so I know that those things are kind of embedded in my system. So I've learned to love them rather than try to shy away from them, because we're all kind of thinking, how do we be hip? How do we be cool? How do we be Trent Reznor? Well, we're all not Trent Reznor, so you might as well love what has made you you, and love what influenced you as a young person. Why did you become a musician in general? Why did you love music, and, from the beginning? So I always go back to that.
I love it. I mean, it makes total sense, because you can't ape someone's style that's not you. And I've talked with other composers about this, of finding what's genuine. And I think even as the audience member, it comes out and it can be a little obvious when a composer is doing something that's not them. And sometimes it's out of their control. If they have a particular temp and the director's in love with it and wants to keep that exact sound.
Yeah.
Your hands get tied. But yeah, it's interesting for you being able to point out, here are the distinct influences that I've had. And it's funny then talking about West Side Story in particular, of here you are, however many years after you first watched it.
Yeah.
Now, I mean, you're not yet, at least, writing the original music for the musical songs, but
right.
Here you are in a musical.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible. Shocking, really, actually. That's kind of the beauty of this whole process, and trusting it, is you really never know where you're going to end up and what you'll end up doing, and hoping that you don't get pigeonholed into one thing, but you keep exploring all of your musical identities, so to speak. And I'll always be interested in doing so. I really hope, for example, I love writing electronic music, and I've worked on thrillers and things, other genres like that in the past, and I love doing that. So I'll continue to pursue all of them. But it is very interesting, given my background, that yes, my first big studio feature happens to be a musical. It feels right. It feels very right.
So do you have the interest of taking it one step further and ever trying your hand at original songs like that? Or are you fine doing the score, or for a musical doing the underscore and letting someone else write the songs?
No, I would definitely be interested. Yeah, I really would. And, I have a songwriting background, and I love that aspect of music, and that would definitely be of interest. I think my focus is solely at the moment on composition, film composition, television composition. But I also I'm producing a record right now for a singer-songwriter who's absolutely brilliant. And I'm never going to stop working on the song end of things as well. It's a big part of who I am and what I love to do. So I'm definitely open to a musical at some stage.
You can follow in the footsteps of Jason Segel's character from Forgetting Sarah Marshall.
Exactly right.
So, and I've talked with a few other people who are either singer-songwriters turned composer or had a solo career at some point as well. And some of the time they just kind of drop it off, and other times they try to keep it going. But how's that balance been for you? I mean, and then for you, you're adding on the additional layer of producing records as well.
Yeah, I mean, I've really been focused on composition for the past couple years, but I'm also constantly writing songs just even for myself. I've gotten on stage in the last couple of years just for fun and played with a rock and roll band, which has nothing to do with what I do as a composer, but it's an outlet for me, which I love doing. And some one-off songs where I've been a co-writer or a co-producer, and I'm working on an EP, finishing up an EP right now in which I co-wrote, I think it's 5 or 6 tracks with different artists, and produced the record with another female producer named AG, who's amazing. So I just try to balance all of it as best I can. And the beauty of doing both just means that I get a reset. When I've been doing a lot of film scoring, it's a beautiful thing, but you can burn out, and you want to make sure that you stay fresh and you stay inspired. And so when I get to go over to the other side and do the songwriting and song producing, that really does, it's a different skill set in a lot of ways, and it's using a different part of your brain. And so that's really refreshing, so that when I go back for the next film or TV thing, I just feel like, okay, I've exercised a lot of different muscles. I'm ready to kind of go in guns blazing. So I'm really fortunate to have that balance, because I speak with a lot of friends of mine who are composers, and it's always the question of like, how do we keep this fresh? How do we still enjoy this? Like, these 7-day weeks of 10 hours a day, like it's hardcore. It's not for, wimps. So how do you keep it fresh and enjoy it?
Well, and even with that, I mean, do you ever still get to the point where you're just like, this is too much music, I need to take a break, reset from everything musically for a little bit?
100%. I think it's so important. And I think for me in particular, I think actually getting out of my home, I just moved into a new home and my studio's in my house. So, I think actually going somewhere, doing something that's outside of this home is so important, because I'm always, a floor away from my rig. And so it's really hard to just check out. I think it's a really healthy and important thing for anyone in any career. Turning off a phone feels almost impossible nowadays.
You're right. It isn't just music. I mean, it's everything. And I think it's so
Yeah.
much harder now with working from home, where my living room is also my workspace. And so it's like, no matter what time or what day, work is right there. So yeah, getting away entirely is such a necessity.
Yeah. And I mean, it's interesting. It's funny. A big part of this job as a composer, I mean, it's not just writing music. It's the 50 emails you get every day, and responding to the post supervisor and calling your music supervisor back and chatting with the editor. I mean, it's just so much of it is kind of that almost admin element, there's so much that goes into this job. So the writing is truly the best part, because it's almost like a 50-50 of just management.
So taking one step further from the writing side of this and going back to Cinderella really quick. So I know that the film finished shooting in, I think, September of 2020 or somewhere around then, right in the midst of COVID still. And with it being an orchestral score, how was the recording process?
We're so lucky we have other places we can go. I mean, we used Vienna Synchron Stage for this score, and they were absolutely incredible. I mean, just top-notch musicians and an amazing conductor. And I used this guy named Jeremy Levy for the orchestration, and he was brilliant as well. He's based in LA. And so we proceeded as we would in any other version, whether or not we were doing it here or somewhere else. We moved forward, and Yeah, I mean, it sucks to not be in the room with the musicians. I mean, I think like I feel like any composer would say, yes, I mean, top three best parts of being a film composer, if not number one, is actually being in the room with the orchestra when they're playing and recording. It's just the most exhilarating experience ever. And it's such an honor to watch these unbelievable musicians play your music. It's just I'll never not get goosebumps. It's kind of mind blowing, when you're experiencing that. But we did it remotely, and we went to a studio here in Los Angeles. Michael and I did, and the music editor, and recorded it remotely, and they were fabulous. And we were able to kind of get everything we needed and more just doing it that way. So I think hopefully not forever, but given the state of the world, it seems like that's going to be more common.
It obviously is unfortunate. I've seen at least some productions that are able to get everyone together, but it looks so odd seeing videos or background stills because they're all distanced and like
Yes.
in your head, everyone in an orchestra is just packed right next to each other. But at least you figured out a workaround that, at least to film, sounded just like anything else.
Yeah, I mean, we were very fortunate. And again, it always comes down to those players being incredible. And, it's just trying to help give direction as best you can in that limited amount of time. But if you have the luxury of recording an orchestra of that size, I mean, I feel like 9 times out of 10, you're probably going to get something pretty incredible, and so we definitely did. Sadly, Michael and I have never met Kay in person, the director, Kay Cannon. We haven't had that experience, which is such a shame. And hopefully we will sooner rather than later. But that's also such a beautiful part of the recording process, is being in the control room with the director and really connecting on the material. And, and they're still there to give some last minute notes if they have feelings about a scene or a cue or what have you. So yeah, and, we had her on Zoom and we were chatting, but it's a very different experience, because it's so valuable for directors to be in the room, and actually hear it live, it going down live is just, I think it's important for directors to understand kind of where you start and where you end up, and harder to do so when it's all remote, but we're doing what we can.
Right. Yeah, nothing you can do about it.
Yeah.
In those situations, I'm curious when the director's there actually hearing it all live for presumably the first time. In your experience, what's that reaction been like? Is it normally a bit of a surprise for them just because it's different than what they've been hearing?
It's a great question. I think it depends on the experience of the director, in the sense of, doesn't matter how many films they've made, but perhaps if they're making films where the scores are mainly electronic and they walk in and maybe this is the first or second time they've ever heard a full orchestra, and especially playing what is truly also their music. It's not just mine, it's theirs. I'm a collaborator there. It's their score as well. I think it's pretty riveting. I've definitely, a best friend of mine who's a fabulous director and also used to be a musician. Every time he walks in, he's still just blown over. It really is an incredible experience. And there are definitely times where a director may say, oh, does it sound a little too big here? Because they haven't heard it. And so we know how to fix that issue, and be respectful of those notes, even on the stage, even during recording. So, but yeah, I feel like for the most part, directors are pretty elated, because it's just it is a magical experience of being in that environment and experiencing that. I haven't had a horror story yet, so and I've heard some, and I won't tell them on right now, but I've heard about them. So I've been very lucky to have positive experiences in that respect.
Good. Well, in one sense, it's too bad because I always love hearing the horror stories because it's, when things go wrong, it's always so interesting. But
Yeah.
I'm glad you haven't experienced it, and hopefully you don't have to.
Yes. You just don't want to hear, hey, can we play the temp when you're recording an orchestra, which may or may not have happened at some point in time. But again, our job is to go, how do we fix this situation? That's a huge part of what we do is, oh my God, these moments can be so brilliant or so terrible. And how do we stay calm and figure out a solution no matter what happens? I think all composers need to go to therapy just to kind of understand their own psychology.
And I'm sure, too, on that side, you have to both develop a thick skin and just be used to hearing no and hearing rejection. I was reading an article recently about the music to 2001, A Space Odyssey,
Mm-hmm.
where Kubrick had all of his music already picked out, but then he hired Alex North to write a score. North wrote his full score, sent it in, didn't get any more notes, and then he watched the premiere, and none of his music was in the film. That's got to be crushing, but at the same time, maybe something to that degree is uncommon, but you've still got to be not just taking notes, but the years that you go through to even get an indie feature, let alone be on a studio feature. That's just got to be years and years of rejection and maybe I don't know if it's being dramatic, but like despair, and at some point it's got to be tough to get through it.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it's the same as being an actor in a way. Like, doesn't matter. We're always still auditioning. Sure, maybe not so much if you're Hans or Michael at that point in your career, but even so, I mean, even those guys, like, you have to continue to pursue this career. Like, you're just starting from the bottom, essentially. It's like Hans always says every time he starts a score, he feels like he's gonna turn the faucet on and nothing's going to come out. I mean, truly, like he said that. And, I remember when I worked at Remote Control one night very late, I was still working and he came out of his studio and he looked at me and he said like, "Oh, Jesse, I got it." And I said, "What?" And he went, "I got the theme." And it was so incredible to see someone like Hans still have that very kind of almost childlike experience, or vulnerable experience where it doesn't matter how many years you have in this career, you're constantly going back to the well of insecurity and trying to figure out how to move through it and find solutions to all of the problems, the issues. And it's pretty remarkable that every composer that I've spoken to, no matter what phase of their career they're in, always still feel a true sense of dread and vulnerability at the beginning of, writing a score. It's really, it's painful. It's painful, but it's rewarding in the end, or we wouldn't still be doing it.
Hearing someone like Hans even saying that, does that give you any despondency, being like, oh shit, I could do this for 40 years, be one of the biggest film composers ever, and still have that feeling? Or is it a bit more comforting knowing that both, whenever you're in that situation, you know that everyone else is, and then it also, at no matter what point, like once it clicks, you're going to have that elation?
Yes, I would definitely say it's comforting without question. I mean, it reminds you that this art, music, it's all subjective, right? So the exploration, you better love the pain and suffering as much as you love figuring out the puzzle. I do think that is one of the most incredible parts of writing music. It's a constant push and pull. It is painful. It's exciting. It's important to learn how to like put the pencil down or move away from the keyboard and start again tomorrow. Like you learn what works for you. You learn how to become comfortable with your own vulnerability, because it is, I mean, it's a scary endeavor every time you try to start writing something new. And we could spend half of our careers just working on one score probably, because we could try it a million different ways. So it's also learning when it's time to commit to an idea or it's time to commit to some kind of instrumentation. And I think it's important. It's, to me, as you said, it's a comfort knowing that even those big guns are constantly going through that no matter what they're working on, And the bigger the project, the scarier it is. It must be. The stakes are that much higher, there's that much more money involved. You're going, shit, I better make this good. So it's even more pressure, I would imagine.
And I think, too, especially depending on what you're working on, like, you take a lot of the Marvel films where they have to get the movies out in order to keep the story going. And you know that, in other projects, if you just really screw it up, you might just get fired, the film gets pushed back a little bit. That isn't even necessarily available because they've got to get 3 more films out this year after that and 2 more TV shows. So yeah, I can't imagine that. But then at the same time, Hans is releasing 3 albums for Dune. Talk about the exact opposite issue, just like having way too much, which I find pretty exciting.
Oh, absolutely. Having worked alongside him, he loves it so much. He lives, breathes, sleeps, yeah, his whole life. And I understand, I relate, but he's really inspiring in that way. It's everything. And so I think when you're that dedicated and you work that hard, yeah, I mean, it's clearly paid off. He's earned it. He's amazing, incredible.
So I did, if you can talk about it, like want to hear a little bit of what the experience working at Remote Control Productions RCP was like, because I mean it's probably one of the most influential aspects of modern film score. I mean, you look at how many both younger up and coming composers, but also huge names have gone through there at some point, whether they started their career there or partway through, at least studio space, and were there for a year or two.
Yeah. I mean, I was very, very fortunate. I was invited to go there and work alongside Bob Badamy, who is Hans's music editor for many, many years. And I've worked as a runner and a coffee maker in a lot of different studio environments in New York City, where I'm from. And I worked at Warner Brothers in London after having had some experience working as an assistant to a composer and as a music editor. And so I've done all of those different types of jobs, but at Remote, because I was invited, I didn't go through the system in that way, which is oftentimes how a lot of young composers do, and that's also very valuable. I mean, Hans always he constantly reminds everyone this business is about how you connect with people and how you treat people. And for me, it was truly the best education I've ever gotten in my life, the most educational experience I've ever had. And I really learned kind of through osmosis, just being a fly on the wall, let alone working for him. You'll always be learning. And yeah, it was incredible. I mean, my first day there, he was having a meeting. He was scoring the Academy Awards. So I walked through the doors and, I'm sitting in the room with him and like Giorgio Moroder and Sheila E. and Pharrell. I mean, it was insane. No one has this story. Like maybe I shouldn't be telling it, but whatever. It's incredible. But it was just working there for me was really a joy. And it was a lot of hard work. There's no question, but it really taught me what this business is about. Not only did I learn so much musically, but I also learned how this business works and how important all aspects of it are, whether that's file management or, how connected you stay to your director or how diligent you have to be or how, delivering on time is incredibly important. Just all of these different aspects of our business are of equal value to that of writing great music. I was very lucky and I'm forever grateful that I had that experience. And I'm sure you'll hear different stories from different people and everyone's experience is different, but I was very, very fortunate. I had an incredible time and I witnessed Lorne Balfe becoming Lorne, I mean, he was definitely already there, but I'm saying before he became Mission Impossible composer and, now Black Widow, I mean, he's just incredible. And so I kind of saw him at the end of that run with Hans before he blew up and went off on his own. And it was just such an amazing thing to witness. And also like Henry Jackman and Junkie, like I was with all those cats and it was incredible. And Dom Lewis and Matthew Margison, I really saw how much work goes into this. And it's an important way to learn exactly what this career requires of a person. So if you want to see the truth, I suggest going and getting an internship at Remote Control if you're a young composer. And again, that having been said, it depends what your goals are too. I'm sure there are a lot of composers out there that don't have interest in scoring Marvel movies, and that sounds kind of phony, but truly maybe those Sundance films are much more their speed or what have you. So it's just also depends where your interests lie and what you want to do. But either way, if you want to learn the business side of this career, yes, Remote Control is the best education you'll ever get.
And I think that's an interesting distinction because I'm sure people like Mika Levy or Daniel Hart who wouldn't make sense for them to ever have gone there just because they're just going to like make weird shit and that's what they're always going to do.
Yes.
It's going to work for certain projects and certain people like me are going to love it and others won't.
No, me too. I mean, yes, they're both incredible.
Look, like Mika Levy, their music just never work in a Marvel movie. I mean, I would be so fascinated to hear it, But fingers crossed, but it's not going to happen.
It would be so great if it did happen,
Yeah.
though. That, I mean, now we're talking, in my opinion. Like, that's what I'm interested in, truly. I really value filmmakers who do think outside the box like that. And of course, we know Marvel's this huge, it's a different thing. But wouldn't it be amazing if there were a director that a huge franchise took under their wing and let them kind of really make something completely innovative and weird, if you want to categorize it as that. But I think that would be incredible. Who knows? But you're right. It's a tough a tough one.
I got my hopes up a little bit, though, at least with Pixar getting Reznor and Ross to work on Soul, because obviously those guys are huge, but you never would have guessed that.
No, exactly. Luckily, they had the safety, if you will, of having John, this incredible pianist and composer. They had that so they could kind of play a little bit and choose someone a little bit more unusual, which is fantastic. But wouldn't it be amazing if we could take it a step further and it could just be someone very unexpected and just kind of push the comfort level? I don't know. That would be fun, to say the least.
You're speaking my language, because that's, like, I love all sorts of more traditional or expected things, but those scores, those combinations that just surprise you. And you're like, whoa, I never expected that.
Yes.
I love it too.
Yeah.
But first off, I'm so glad you shared a bit of your experience at RCP, because it's such an important and big institution, but at the same time, you don't hear a ton of what goes on behind the scenes. So, like, that's really cool. And that had to have been such a weird, surreal experience, both working with Hans, but then, like, that list of just other huge names. I mean, some of them weren't necessarily, like, massive at the time, but even still, like, Junkie XL, even before he was in film music, I remember listening to his music, I don't know, 15 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and that's the beautiful thing. I mean, Hans has such a gift for kind of seeking out interesting voices. Like, that's really, among his other 1 billion gifts. But, he's constantly looking for somebody unusual, someone different, someone, frankly, who has something to say, and that's so important. And I think that's why those guys have continued to exceed probably his expectations in a certain way, because luckily they're able to learn everything one could possibly ever want to learn from someone like Hans, but they're still able to maintain their authentic voice, kind of circling all the way back around to the beginning of our conversation. But that is the ultimate goal, I think, is to be able to handle anything and work in tandem with any director and find the most interesting ways to help support and tell the story being told. And also, again, how do you maintain your own voice through all of that? And I think those guys have really found a way to do so. And there's a lot of other upcoming, composers who are also very skilled at that. And it'll be exciting. I hope that the industry makes room for all of those people as well. And I think it is, and I think it will. It's an odd time, but I'm a fan of those independent films that you speak of. And I hope that there's more light shed on those types of films as well, because we're definitely in a very Marvel-centric world right now. And I'm looking forward to kind of other stories being told and, being pushed to the forefront. So we'll see.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love being able to end on, like, a hopeful, optimistic note. So you
Yeah.
nailed it.
There you go. Oh, well, thank you.
So, Jess, once again, I'm so glad you're able to join. Pleasure speaking, and I'm looking forward to the Cinderella soundtrack release, which I know that your and Michael's soundtrack suite is the last track, so I'll be looking forward to be able to give that a listen on its own, outside of the context of the film as well.
Yeah, and we're releasing an OST as well, so that'll be available too, which will be great.
Okay, awesome. Do you know when that's going to come out? Around the same time, I guess?
I think around the same time. I have a feeling, I may be wrong, but I think the album comes out the same day as the movie. Maybe I'm wrong, but I have a feeling that that's true. So the original soundtrack will be probably right behind it, I would imagine. So
Okay, we'll keep our eyes and our ears open for it.
amazing. Great. Thank you.
All right, well, thanks again, and I think it's still early in the day for you, so enjoy the rest of the day and the rest of the week.
I will. You too. Thanks for having me.